Hello and welcome to the Proceed podcast, the podcast where we dive into the world of data management. I'm your host, Rebecca, and today we're talking about the S4HANA journey. Should businesses address data management before or after the S4HANA journey? I'm joined today by Nick Parkin, the founder of Proceed Group. So let's get started. So hi Nick, thanks for joining me today.
Hello everybody.
So first off, could you give us a brief summary of what we mean by data management in the context of the S4HANA journey?
So data management means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So for instance, if you go into Google and type in SAP data management, what you'll find is things like quality, the quality of the data, looking at additional data that you could actually add to your S4HANA system. But from Proceed's point of view, data management really means one is at the top, do you really need that data in your S4 system? Then you need to start looking at how old that data is. So if you're moving a load of data to S4HANA, and for instance, in your old ECC6 system, you've got 20 years of data, do you actually need to bring over 20 years of data? If, for instance, you're doing a brownfield migration, do I actually need 20 years of data, or do I just need 7 or 10 years of data? So that's the next thing to look at, is that retention period on the existing data. And literally, you don't bring over 20 years, you bring over 10. And then the next thing to look at, of course, is really where Proceed comes in, is of that 10 years of data that I want to bring over to my S4HANA system, do I actually need all of that online, or can I put that into some form of archive? So again, it's to look at what the data is coming into S4 and deciding that I only need 2 years in the S4 system, but 8 years can go into the archive, and I can always read that data from the archive through my S4 transactions. So for me, that's what makes up data management.
And what's the impact of not doing any data management at all before the move to S4HANA?
So on the actual going to, there's two real impacts. One is the size of the database that you're taking over, because it could be quite big, and then that's going to affect the cost of not only the memory in HANA, but maybe your license from SAP as well. So again, the smaller the database, the less money you're going to spend on the actual HANA application itself, the HANA memory. And of course, depending on what type of HANA license you bought from SAP, that cost may be smaller. But the other big impact is if you have a large database, then the time taken to actually do the migration, if you're doing a brownfield migration, could be quite large or long. And don't forget, most people, if they're going to do a migration from one system to another, need to do it in a relatively short time because they've got users going live on the system. So really, there's 2 long periods in the year. One's at Easter, where typically you'll have 4 days to do a migration, and typically at Christmas. Rest of the year, you might have a bank holiday in the UK, for instance, gives you 3 days. But at the end of the time, the smaller the database, the quicker the migration will take place.
And you don't have to mention any names, of course, but do you have any examples where data management wasn't addressed and the implications of that?
As you say, I can't name the customer, but we have one very large corporate customer with a large 40 terabyte database. They got it down to about 30 terabytes, but then decided that they would then do the migration to HANA. Unfortunately, fortunately, they tested it out before they did a live cutover, and their migration time was 130 hours. So when you think about that, that's over 5 days. Yeah, 5 days that you're going to be down with no users being able to use the system at all. So, what did they do? They then actually archived even deeper into their data to get it down to even smaller. But this happens all the time. And one other thing I'd say, if somebody's going to actually do a migration and they've got a large database, then they actually need to dry run this a number of times to make sure that they can get it into the window. Because everybody says, oh, look, we've got a weekend to do this. We've got 48 hours. You haven't got 48 hours, because at the end of the day, what you have to do, you have to have a cut-off point. If you haven't migrated by this time, you need to put the system back into the state it was before. So you can't go to the last hour. You might be able to go to 36 hours and take the next 12 hours. Don't forget, you've got all of these users that you pointed to the new system. You're going to have to point them back to the old system again. So you can't really go to the last minute here. And that's why it's really good if you have Easter or Christmas, because you have that time to do it in.
And what about costs? Can you talk a little bit about the cost implications?
So a customer that decides to go with HANA on premise, i.e. that it's in their own data center. So they've got to go out and buy all the hardware. They've probably got a system integrator that's going to come in and actually do the migration for them. So it's not just the production system that they're going out to buy. They're probably going out to buy the production system, the equivalent size disaster recovery system. You probably have a pre-production system and a quality assurance system, again the same size as the production system. You'll then have a smaller development system, and most customers have one or two sandboxes where they can have a play. Now, when you add all that up, that for a largish database could run into millions of pounds. So again, what we can do is, by shrinking those systems down by archiving, we can save considerable amounts of money. Half that investment. Okay, so if a customer's going out and spending £1 million on hardware, we could probably save them £500,000. Okay, by shrinking that database right the way down. However, if they go into a hyperscaler like Azure, AWS, or Google, or any other hyperscaler out there, then again, it's considerable costs. And my view has always been, if we can shrink the database right the way down, we can probably save them, half the money they're spending on the hyperscaler. And we've got loads of examples where customers have gone and it's £50,000 a month or £100,000 a month without any data management. We've gone in and done the data management project, cut the database down below half, 70% reduction, and saved those customers considerable money. We saved one customer at least £50,000 a month. And that project was less than £200,000. So the actual return on investment for that project was quite considerable. Then you've got the time. So don't forget, if you're going to go brownfield, you're going to do a database migration. You're going to have to run it a number of times. You may not be able to get into a window big enough to actually do the database migration. You might have to then reduce the size of the database to find a way of getting it in that window. Again, this all takes time. Time is money. So if you know that you can get the system down into the size that you need to be able to do the migration in a window, the savings are quite considerable, because you don't have to have so many dry runs, so many looking at the data and trying to work out what bits of data you take out. You shrunk the system, you've worked it out using the SAP tools that you can get into a particular size, and once that's done, you know how long it's going to take to actually run that migration.
And what advice would you give to a business that's just starting on their S4HANA journey? We've talked about the importance of data management, but how should a business get started? What are the sort of things they need to think about in terms of the time that's needed and the resources? Can you just talk a little bit about the best practices on getting started with a data management project?
So the quicker you do a data management project, the better off you are. What you can't really do, though we've done it, is actually do the actual data management project while somebody's actually running their S4 transformation at the same time. So we run it alongside. That is not ideal. The best thing to do, 6 months, maybe 9 months before you actually start your transition to S4, you actually start the data management project. That way you have the resources around to be able to do it. You know, the businesses are not worried about trying to do a data management project alongside an S4 project. The resources you need some IT people. So you need some, typically for a data management project, you need some infrastructure people. You'll need your basis team. And then you'll need some people, functional people from the business. And typically we can't take those people out for weeks at a time. Nobody has that time available. So we've always built the archiving project in a way that we minimise the business users' time. So where we run workshops, it's not workshops for days, it's workshops for hours. And there's 2 times where you actually need the business involvement. One is up front, where we create the archive strategy or blueprint, because we need the input into how they run that SAP system. And the other part is further down into the project when we do the user acceptance testing. So that's them coming to look. We've taken all of the data out that they want to take out. We put it in the archive, and now we need to test that system to make sure it's not broken. Luckily, we can say that over 700 projects, we've never broken the system, but I would never like a customer not to do user acceptance testing and make sure that everything's working properly.
Okay, and then final question. So based on your expertise and experience, what strong advice or recommendations would you give to businesses? How should they get started? What's the first step?
So the first step is really for the business to understand if they have a problem. You know, we speak to lots of customers where they don't think they have a problem until we point the problem out to them. And that's quite difficult. A lot of customers will think, my 40 terabyte ECC6 system, that sounds big, but when it goes into HANA, it might be only 10 terabytes because of the compression. But that 10 terabytes will be a lot of money. So the first thing they've got to decide is, have they got a problem? I'd say anybody that's got a database bigger than 2 terabytes, who's been running for more than 3 years, has a problem. Okay, so that's the first thing. And if they have got a problem, then they need to start looking at how do they minimise the problem. Is it we throw some of the data away, we delete it? Is it we're going to archive the data? So they need some professional advice on what can they do. And typically, we've been doing this for 21 years. We know that a lot of the systems integrators out there have people that can do archiving, and they think it's a very technical thing. From a complete project, the technical bit is only about 20% of the project. The other 80% is actually working with customers, business users, to make sure they're happy with the archiving, how they get their data back, how internal audit can view the data, how external audit can view the data, and if a tax authority comes in and says, we want, for instance, in Europe to do a VAT inspection, then you can give them that data in a very short space of time. So my view to everybody going to S4HANA, don't wait. Don't think you can put all this data into HANA, wait for a year, and then maybe start looking at a data management project. You need to start thinking about day one, getting the data that you've got to put into S4 shrunk down. And then when you're into S4, you start archiving from day one. If you don't do that, you will have a nasty surprise, probably within 6 months, a year, of a very quickly growing S4 system.
That's great. Thank you very much, Nick. And for more on this topic, visit our website, proceedgroup.com. There's a number of resources on there to support you. We have a case study with Croda International. We reduced their database size by over 80% ahead of their S4HANA migration. And also best practices for brown and greenfield migrations and much, much more. So I will provide a link to all of this stuff in the episode bio. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time.